Welcome. I think, what are we on now? We're on the 15th or 16th? This topic is so incredibly interesting, I just can't stop talking about it. Actually, I've probably been talking about it since time immemorial, women and men and sexuality. So I expanded myself today, you see, my incarnation. I thought it would really be nice to ask a woman. No, I really didn't incarnate, but I thought it would really be nice if we could have a woman express her point of view, her understanding, and how she has applied Krishna consciousness, and particularly understood and applied the teachings of Krishna consciousness about women and the cultural understandings, and then how she's utilized or understood, applied, or taken some and not taken others, and lived in Krishna consciousness for how long?
Almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years. So this is Mahamaya.
Hare Krishna.
Mahamaya is my god sister, and she gladly agreed to come tonight when I asked her about the opportunity. So I'm going to interview her. I'm going to ask her some questions, and then we'll discuss. But before we begin, I wanted to relate something I saw this week that somebody sent me. On the internet, there's a video of a trolley car in San Francisco in 1906. And the interesting thing about this video is, in 1906, this is when 35mm motion picture cameras, I guess, first came out or were popular or could get in the hands of more people than those making movies. So what they did is they put this motion picture camera on the front of the trolley. So you get to drive down, I don't know if it's Market Street or wherever, it's a street in San Francisco that goes to Embarcadero, to the bay. And so you get to sit like you're sitting in the front of a trolley and you're driving down a street in 1906 in San Francisco.
Wasn't that the year of that big
earthquake? The earthquake, yeah, I think this was in January and the earthquake came in April. So this was 4 months before the earthquake. And so what you see, the interesting thing you see, or the first thing you notice is, it's a bit, if you've been to India, it's a bit like India. There are no traffic lights. And so people are driving, they're going both directions on the same side of the street, they're crossing over in front of people, and about 30-40% of the vehicles are horse-driven. There are cars, and there's a lot of trolleys. But the interesting thing is, all the men, every man, maybe with the exception of 0.001%, were all wearing black pants, black jackets, black shirts, and black hats, and most of them had big handlebar mustaches. And the women were wearing long dresses and with long sleeves and high collars and big hats, that came out to here. Huge hats. I don't know what you call those hats.
I don't know.
And so that, so that's 104 years ago. So I'm looking at this. This is the culture in America 104 years ago, that women were dressed head to toe. The only basically thing you saw were their hands and their face. It's kind of interesting what's happened in 100 years. And that, that was just normal and acceptable. And then the men, they all conformed to a certain dress code. So I thought that was interesting, and how much things have changed within 100 years. Anyway, so if you've been following this show, we've been discussing many of the things that Prabhupada said about women, what I call the red flags. And we had discussed, the idea that perhaps maybe men are better. Of course, Bhakti and Carol always points out that men do all these, they are the ones who are stealing. They're the ones who, beating their wives up, the drunkards. They're the ones raping kids, and raping women, and raping men also. They're just so, so we've talked about this and how to understand what the Vedic scriptures are teaching us, particularly when they're saying women should be subordinate to men. Women are like children, they're less intelligent, all these things. So I wanted to invite somebody who could just tell us, well, what do you read? What do you feel? What do you see? What's your experience? Both positive and negative, if so, when you read those things. And this is Mahamaya's own way that she deals with it. This is not being propagated as the standard for every woman for all times. It's just we're asking her how she's dealt with it. And you can pick any aspect of anything you've read that comes to mind, and if you can't think of some things, I may bring some up.
Well, I know some of the controversial things, like women are less intelligent, or and over the years, and hearing all these Bhagavatam classes, where the emphasis has been on the woman is the cause of the man's fall down.
Right.
She's the witch, the Maya Devi. I mean, it's funny. Prabhupada naming Mahamaya is not all bad, right? But when I hear those things in the Bhagavatam classes, I hear it through the knowledge that Prabhupada makes a distinction between ordinary women and devotee women. And so those of us who have accepted Prabhupada's teachings and, taken shelter of him, and certainly those of us who got initiated by him or his disciples, there's I just feel like there's a whole different view that we can take to those things. Like Prabhupada speaking to the ordinary women, but devotee women are different. We're not. I don't know.
Speaking about women, just in general, just the broad range. In general, women are like this. In general, men are like this.
Yeah, in the material world, and the vast number of people on the planet are in the material world. They're not. They haven't pulled the plug of the fan. The karma that's going on, because we've taken up Krishna consciousness. So I just didn't. I never took it that Prabhupada was trying to discourage the women. I've always taken it that Prabhupada wanted the women to be everything we can be. Sometimes he would say the women were better, like distributing books, for instance. He didn't always say that, but there were instances, and it's just not, these controversial things are just not meant to discourage women from taking up Krishna consciousness.
Well, you mentioned the book thing, and I think one of the things with Prabhupada, he was revolutionary. So, in traditional Indian culture, women wouldn't go out approaching men.
Right.
They wouldn't have basically any social intercourse with men. What to speak of going up to them and selling them something and getting money and alone, one-on-one. So. Well,
that was Prabhupada's brilliance, to use our culture and, use it for distributing books. What if Prabhupada had come and just said, okay, all the women should just keep their heads covered, and, like his mother, we heard that she never, the light of day never, right? She would come out of her house and into a palace. If she went somewhere, she was just always sheltered. And
right.
if he tried to institute that on us, the women wouldn't have joined. But he used our natural way of being. Like, we're not 100% shy around men because we grew up, most of our schools were co-ed. So, I don't know, I think Prabhupada was, in every way, brilliant to use that. Now, this, the thing about being shy, the women are supposed to be shy and they wouldn't interact. I think he said something about on the chase, we're like the tiger, and then back at the temple, then the women would, if they were out in karmic clothes, then they'd put a chadar on, and then they'd be more shy, and there was very little interaction between the men and the women. So women are versatile; they can do that, right? Be one way on Sankirtan and another way.
Yeah. So he
in
was.
The temple.
He was. I just see that as an example of breaking. Accepting the breaking from the Vedic culture, just accepting this is how it is in America. So it's normal. Yeah. It's normal for the women to do that. It's normal for men on the street to speak with women. Nobody thinks it's weird. And
maybe Prabhupada was just picking his battles. He no meat, fish, or eggs, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling. That he was so strict with. Not at the beginning, but certainly quickly.
Yeah.
But this kind of thing, I was just reading how, when Prabhupada would go to the Gaudiya Math, that he would just see widows. It's like, we could have ended up like that too.
Mm-hmm.
We're just, a limited number of people participating.
Right.
I wasn't a book distributor, so I have to say, I helped produce the books.
Well, also another thing I was just thinking when you were talking about how in the early days we would do Harinam Sankirtan. That was the main activity.
Yeah.
So the whole temple would go out. So it was all men and women in one van. We'd throw everybody in a van, 15, 20 devotees. And, they'd chant together, women on one side, men on the other side. And because we were raised that way, no one really had a problem with it. And part of the problems came in the early 70s when some of the men started taking sannyas. And so they kind of, to my perception, created a problem in a sense, a problem that didn't really exist by, how should we say, I don't want to say magnifying the problem, but maybe perhaps imagining a problem that didn't exist, and then by emphasizing this is the nature of women, this is the nature of men, it kind of almost made us aware of a problem that we weren't aware of. So then now all of a sudden it's kind of like you might be outside, it might be cold, but you're having a good time. You don't notice it until someone comes around and says it's really cold out here, and then you say, yeah, it is. I didn't notice it.
Right. It's like putting a label on it. They were saying, oh, there's love affairs going on in the temple. What was going on is men and women were getting married. It wasn't happening that often.
Yeah.
But then they said, okay, this isn't right. There has to be more separation. The women should be at the back, call women mother. It was very unnatural.
Well, also, there was marriage was looked down upon. So that was
a fall down.
That was like,
to some extent, right?
Yeah. If you have women around, the men are going to get married. So then it was already like, well, do we even want to have women around? Because,
Right.
It wasn't like people were thinking, well, the men will want to get married anyway, so you should have women around. They were thinking, no, if there's no women, they won't get married, which wasn't true, of course. Of course, we didn't know. We were too young to know.
But that just reminds me, there was the other half of how I hear Prabhupada's controversial purports and the classes that were so anti-women. The other half was that I knew that the men, the brahmacharis especially, had to be strong to maintain their vows. So it was like I felt the class was directed to them. And we're just kind of listening. And they just had to be told, be strong, be strict, do what you have to do to stay brahmachari.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew 95% of the population in the world is married. So, it's going to happen.
So are you saying it was like your service to the brahmacharis to be put down, so that would keep them more strict by saying, well, this is the nature of women. They're like this, and it's an entanglement, and your chances of going back to Godhead are minimized. If you're married, if you can remain renounced, it's better.
I saw it more as tolerating, not as, okay, this is my service, let me do my service. No, it was more like, we may be boiling inside, but it's like, okay, the brahmacharis need to hear this, and, so we just have to tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like that.
I always thought I always looked at the Bhagavatam like a book that was speaking to men, wasn't speaking to men and women, so that, so naturally, like you don't, although Prabhupada said when they're speaking about women, it's the same thing for women in relation to men, but it's not there. And the Bhagavatam said that way because it was meant for men, and the men were the gurus of their wives, so they were taking instruction. So you see that slant; it seems almost disproportionate. And say, well, why not the same thing for the women? Why don't you say men are the cause of bondage or Maya?
Well, Prabhupada did say that sometimes.
Yeah.
He would switch it, like you said.
Yeah.
But
in general, it was
the men are the gurus, and the wives accept them as pati guru.
Then, so how would you take it? Was it, of course, one thing is reading what Prabhupada said, and the other thing is some young man speaking his realization about women and the nature of women and the relationship of men and women, particularly in the early days when 22 and 23-year-old men were renounced and having a difficult time doing it, so a lot of the aversion was coming out. So how would you take it? Would you see that, well, these guys are just struggling and that's why they're speaking this way, or would you get offended, or what? Or would some of the women get offended, or both?
Again, it was really a question of tolerating, because I specifically remember a young sannyasi, and he was saying the Sanskrit word maitunya, and practically spitting as he was saying it. It was like, it was difficult, but we were so enthusiastic to spread Krishna consciousness. It was like, I don't know, it wasn't the center of our lives. It wasn't, It
wasn't a big issue.
It just wasn't. I mean, of course, we were all, I was a brahmachari for so many years, and so many of us were. So it was, it just kind of rolled off, at least for me, it rolled off my back, like, okay, he has to say that. You were happy, you had facility to do service, so it wasn't like the lectures were translating into this situation where the men got more facility than the women in terms of service or living quarters or whatever. Okay, well, at that time, the early 70s, but mid-70s, then, it got more difficult.
For the women.
But,
in what way?
The whole thing with the Radha Damodar party, there was such a large group of brahmacharis, and they were preaching against you were grihasta, so you must have known.
Well, the Radha Damodar party was traveling, how many? Maybe 100 brahmacharis in buses.
More, maybe.
Yeah, traveling. And so they would, their basic idea was, temple is Maya, grihasta life is Maya, and so they would preach that.
And then they were stealing brahmacharis, like your head of your temple presence of grihasta, so you should,
join the brahmachari.
Not associate with it. It's not good association. Join us. So that caused some difficulties for women. But I personally was having my own experience during those years, 75, 76. I was in India. Oh. So that was another experience that, different than what was going on in America. And that was, women really had to be submissive in India. I mean, women were, it was just a different atmosphere. Maybe because we thought this is where the Vedic culture is really happening. Something like that. And it was just easier somehow to be subservient to the will of the authorities. But when I came back to America in 77, and I was hearing from my god sisters what was going on, I mean, there were some really head-on collisions, men and women clashes that were not pretty.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about when these things are going on, and then you're introducing Krishna consciousness to women? Was that an issue amongst women, that how are we going to bring women into an environment unless they feel these are their brothers and they feel welcome? And
I felt that we kept on going preaching just with the same enthusiasm, but we were noticing that some women were hesitant to join. I mean, that was clear. And there were less women in the movement. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I do the statistics for the Prabhupada disciples, and did you ever ask me how many were women?
1/3 women, 2/3 men.
Not even a third.
Really?
Women. 28%.
Oh.
And I can understand, it's because even though women weren't really renounced, it was a movement of renunciation more than now. Now, I mean, I see now the movement is grihastas. Mm-hmm. It's more balanced. We have the renunciation in the background, and now we're more focused on healthy and happy families and raising children and, being quote unquote normal. So
maybe some people say we're too normal now.
Maybe.
Too normal for our own good.
Well, maybe the pendulum swung the other way and it'll balance out a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I think open communication and, having family values. I mean, who can deny these are good things?
Yeah. Okay, we have some questions.
Oh, we do? Okay.
So, this is from Bhakti and Carol. She's asking you, do women need to be sheltered by men always? Is there an out besides living in the ashram?
Well, I know of some women who are what we call
at all ages and situations. Yeah.
all ages and situations.
Because that's the idea, women protected by the father, the husband, or the son.
Right, that's the perfect Vedic paradigm.
So she's saying, do they need to be sheltered by men?
Well, some women don't think they need to be, and they seem to be doing okay with it.
You would say
it has to be. I mean, how can you just? It didn't work to force women to get married. It didn't work back in the 70s when that was. You probably remember, in the early 70s when first woman got initiated, she had to get married.
I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't even know? Oh,
not where I lived. Not where I lived.
Really? Well, it was going on when I joined, which was early 71. And by the time I got initiated, Prabhupada had been in India for so long. So many people were waiting to get initiated. There was such a big initiation on the East Coast that all the young, pretty girls, they had to get them married, quote unquote, had to get them married. But, I was, 25, I think, when I got initiated. I was older.
You were an old maiden.
Well, actually, I wasn't an old maiden. I actually came to move it married. They got so many girls married, and there just wasn't any more men left to get them married to. So they kind of, didn't force the women to. But really, I saw women get forced to be married, and then some of them just immediately blooped. It just wasn't for them. So I personally believe that nobody should be forced.
Yeah.
So always be choice. So.
But there's a letter, and Prabhupada was asked that. Do they have to get married? And he said, no, it's not necessary. I mean, if they want to remain, he said Krishna could be their husband.
Well, I don't know who was instituting it, but that was the rule.
Yeah, not where I lived.
You were on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
East Coast. Different.
So your answer is that it's an individual case.
I think, I think most women probably do want that, and I've been married for 32 years. There is a certain shelter of just being able to say I'm married.
Right.
Right. And I was a brahmachari for 7 years before I got married, and I know what the experience was. And I was totally okay being a brahmachari. And I would say I'm more peaceful being grihasta.
One of the things I noticed in noticing who married who, and the longevity and the steadiness of a person in Krishna consciousness, that it always seemed that the women who married men who were steady remained steady, and the women who married men that were weak or left Krishna consciousness, they also had, not always, but generally, they were the ones that had more difficulty. So it was easier for the women who had husbands who were stable in Krishna consciousness, from what I've seen.
Well, when you're saying that, I was just thinking how there are some devotees who would say that the women are the strong ones in Krishna consciousness. So maybe it goes both ways.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Maybe some of the women being strong in Krishna consciousness kept the men strong, so that
it could be.
It looks like maybe it's the man being strong, but
well,
it could be the other way.
Also know that because you're married, so if your husband is becoming weak or going off, so to speak, you don't want to divorce him just because he's not strong in Krishna consciousness. So then you kind of have to live or adapt a little bit to that association, that lifestyle.
Or when choices, yeah, exactly. Well, I wouldn't say purifying, but like enliven.
Yeah.
So that the experience of Krishna consciousness is something that he looks forward to and doesn't want to give it up.
Yeah, that's true. That works sometimes, but men's egos are quite big.
Yeah.
So they may not always go along.
Well,
so,
yeah.
She's got another question.
Yeah.
Her second question. I have heard a somewhat soft interpretation of no illicit sex. Does Srila Prabhupada approve of this?
Well.
You want to answer that?
Yeah, I know there's two interpretations. I mean, one is, sex is only for procreation within marriage, right? That's the hard line. And then the soft line, which you hear more and more, which is, well, whatever goes on in the privacy of your home and your bedroom is your business, but at least keep it within marriage, right?
Yeah.
And am I allowed to say my opinion on this?
As long as you stated your opinion.
Well, I see it as, when a couple gets married, that, like, there's this high standard that's like perfection, and we can't beat ourselves up if that's not able, the couple's not able to immediately be like that. But gradually, strictness is definitely valuable, and so
what about devotees? I mean, it seems like it's not such a complicated question if it's being asked by people who never took the vow. They're just like, okay, I'm a devotee, I read Srila Prabhupada's books, this is the standard, and like you say, I'm going to try to come to that standard at some point in my life. Now I'm 21, and sometimes I can't do it, but hopefully by the time I'm 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, I'll be able to do it. But then you have, so that seems like acceptable to everyone. But then you have people who've taken the vow. So then the question comes, well, should I take the vow and go for it? And if I can't go for it, at least I went for it, and I'll get back to it when I'm ready. Or should I wait till I'm 50 years old before I take the vow and take initiation? So that it seems, in my mind, to complicate the issue more, because initiation is such an important part of the practice. But then you have this paradox that you want to take initiation, be connected with the guru, but you're not certain you can follow. So how would you instruct somebody who's thinking of taking initiation, but they're not 100% sure they can follow all the time?
Well, I've been asked this by a young couple, and I would say that the important thing is to, like, if you're questioning, should I get initiated or not?
Well, now we're in 20 years.
Wow. Well, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, it seems like it's important to, there is such a thing as integrity. We want to do what we say we're going to do. That's really important.
Right.
At the same time, have any of the current gurus discussed this openly, or is this a taboo subject for them?
It's discussed privately, generally.
Well,
rather than openly.
Yeah.
I don't really think it's taboo. I think we've made it taboo. Because gurus are caught in a corner because their disciples are making a vow to them.
Right.
These are the principles Prabhupada gave. So it's difficult for them to say, well, just keep it in marriage, and someday follow, which ultimately, when a disciple's in a situation where they can't follow, that's what the guru has to say, because there is no other answer other than keep trying and don't beat yourself up. And or what I've been told, maybe a good answer to this also, is that I've been told some gurus will tell their disciples, well, if you can't remain perfectly celibate, then be regulated. So don't just. That's the whole principle in the Vedic culture is regulation. If you require sense gratification, regulated. Even I remember in our temples, one of the differences about living in a temple, which I also to this day still do, but one of the differences living in a temple, I remember, as opposed from before living in the temple, was in the temple we had meals at mealtime, and that was it. We didn't eat in between. We wouldn't snack a little this and that. So I lived in temples maybe for 30 years of my life, and it was just most of those years there was no dinner. Dinner was a little snack, and there was breakfast and there was lunch,
Usually hot milk at night.
Yeah, or something,
Maybe
a little
yeah.
maha if you're hungry or whatever. So we were pretty much, breakfast 8:39, and then lunch 1:32, and it was kind of a big lunch. And so it was the same principle. It's like, okay, if you're going to eat, that's all right, eat prasadam, but just eat it at this time, and don't 2 hours later eat, then 2 hours later eat. And so that's the whole principle of controlling the senses. So it's regulation. If I'm going to do it, this is the time, and this is what I'm going to do, and then forget about it. Well, so it's for me to this day. I never snack. That was my habit. I just learned that. So I'm with other people, and they're always snacking. I was like, "What's wrong with you? You just ate dinner an hour ago. Why are you eating now?"
That's healthier.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think with it makes sense. It makes sense to me. I was thinking how, when Prabhupada first started the movement, he was just so liberal. I mean, you read about, Shyama was carving Lord Jagannath, and, Prabhupada saw his pack of cigarettes on top of the mantle or the deity or someplace, right?
Top of Lord Jagannath.
Top of Lord Jagannath, I thought it was. And he didn't just come down heavy on everyone. He just, at the beginning, he gradually introduced the principles. So if somebody's, coming to the movement and they're hearing these rules, I know that, vows are obviously meant for, purification. I mean, to guide us and give us, purpose and so many things. But if it's going to put us out of the game, we're not going to keep being inspired in Krishna consciousness, because it's a natural progression. When you become a devotee, then you accept a spiritual master and he accepts you, and that's called, initiation, right?
Right.
So why shouldn't it happen timely?
There's so many monastic traditions in the world, Hindu and Buddhist and Christian, and there are so many renunciates who left the ashrams at 40 and 50 years old and got married.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very common, not just in our movement. So,
yeah.
One devotee says, better be when the devotee can't follow, sometimes they'll think, well, let me be a Christian, because that way I can be a good Christian. So better be a good Christian than a bad Hare Krishna. So we don't want to bring people to that standard.
Right.
But then also you have the problem of guilt, because particularly if I've taken a vow, or even if I've taken the vow to myself, and I can't follow it, then I may feel extremely guilty. On the other side of that equation is I think we need to understand that Prabhupada understood our humanness, and he understood what he was dealing with, and we shouldn't use that as an excuse, but at least understand that if our intention is to be pure, and we deal with our faults and we deal with our fall downs and gradually rectify in ourselves and learn from them and do what's necessary to become stronger, and see that we're making some progress, then we don't have to think, well, Prabhupada's really hates me and I'm no good and can't show my face, and because that will, in a sense, regret has its healthy side because it signals that something needs to be improved.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a natural side of, when I say natural, I mean the natural inclinations or urges of the body are there. And you see that we were today in class, we were talking about Jayananda. And I don't know if you all know Jayananda, but Jayananda is his disappearance today, and we're talking about his stories and his activities, and what a lot of those were saying. He was very unpretentious. He was extremely humble, unusually humble. It's not, like some people are humble, but he was, you could see he was just, there was nothing false about him. And when we were hearing those stories, I was thinking to myself, I'm not like that. I might be like that a little bit, but to the degree that he was, I was just thinking, I'm not like that. And I wasn't like that 40 years ago when I became a devotee, and I'm not like that now. And then I was listening today to a Buddhist monk who was talking about how when we, even after 40 years of monastic life, we still have the same personality. We're still, get agitated by things, and we have these psychoses and neuroses. So we come to Krishna consciousness, we are what we are, and even despite so much practice, there's a certain side of us that it doesn't die so easily unless we're really, really working on it and really conscious of it and really focused on purification. And even still, it's deeply rooted in so much in our DNA, in our personality, in our past karma, and our present karma. So I thought that was interesting, just to acknowledge how deeply rooted our conditioning is, and it almost seems like the effort is really what Prabhupada or our spiritual master is really looking at. Okay, you're conditioned, but you're making an effort. You have an intention to transcend this. You're improving. You're doing something, and then you're dealing with it practically.
Yeah. So I was also thinking, specifically about this question about sex in marriage and the vows, that it seems like that if the disciple actually has that conversation, is brave enough to ask the questions and have that conversation with the guru before taking initiation, then they can get clear. What do they expect? Because I think some of them may say yes, the highest standard or nothing else,
right? And
others may have a little more, sympathetic understanding, like you were talking about. So if you know what you're vowing, how because the guru is a transparent Vaimita you. Mm-hmm. They're taking initiation from a person. He has his view.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of sometimes devotees make the assumption that someday I'll follow, and until I'm able to follow, I won't follow. But my guru understands that, and like you're saying, well, maybe he doesn't. You have to ask him.
Yeah. I mean, Prabhupada said that marriage is a license for sense gratification, but it's very, regulated.
Right.
So I think well,
that's what a license means. Some restrictions.
Yeah, some restrictions. But I think if you go into it thinking, oh, right, I can just enjoy, that's not going to work.
The other, I was thinking about this week, just the idea of shooting for something, which is very great, because that's noble and that's empowering. Okay, yeah. I'm going to do this, and then someone may say, well, maybe you shouldn't shoot for something that great, because what if you can't do it? And then they could answer and say, well, if I miss the goal, still I've made the effort. That's devotional service. Like the saying is, shoot for the moon. If you don't get the moon, at least you'll land up on the stars. Something like that.
Prabhupada's example is shoot for the rhinoceros, and if you don't make it, everybody say, well, it was impossible anyway.
So it seems in Prabhupada's giving sannyas, although later he stopped it, or in giving devotees so many positions, it seems that his idea was go for it. That at least if you've tried and failed, it's better than you haven't. Of course, some people will say, judiciously will say, well, don't go for it, but you can go so high that you'll fall on your face. You'll just crash from a high position, whereas if you go gradually, you'll more rapidly achieve a higher position, which is also true. So it seems...
But you're talking about renunciation, right?
Yeah, or particular renunciation, yeah. Or choosing your ashram, which ashram. So it seems like both things are there depending on the individual, that some people have that nature just to go for it. So I want to go for it.
Yeah.
I want to be a brahmachari, or I'm going to be a grihastha, and I'm going to be strict. I'm going to live in another room, or just be, And I would say in answer to her question is that a lot depends on what their goals are. You may think, you say, well, the husband and wife live in separate rooms, and someone may look at that and say, well, that's like really weird, and someone else may say, well, in Vedic culture, the women lived in the middle of the house and the men lived in the outer rooms of the house, and that was normal. So if the husband and wife agree, if they think that's fine, then it's fine. If it works for them, if that's what they need to do or they want to do, then that's fine. And if it doesn't work for them, then
course, the example you give of the Vedic culture, you say the women of the house. I mean, it was
a group of women,
extended family.
Yeah.
So there was, they were learning by seeing example, their own family. Of course, in ISKCON, most of us who joined early came from dysfunctional families. They were not devotees. It wasn't the great example. But we're seeing second generation, third generation. They have a chance to, live differently than we did. And the separate, you hit on something with a separate room because, like, boy, I mean, I've had a separate room for my husband for so many years. To me, that's like sanity, like my own.
Yeah, and some
peace
people,
and quiet.
Some people think that's like so weird. Like, how can you live with your husband in the same house in a separate room?
Well,
So let's see. Carol has some more. The second question: I was told women in marriage should provide for the (parenthesis) illicit sex needs of men. Reasons given that it keeps them calmer to pursue Krishna consciousness, and it's better for a man to be with one woman rather than several. That it is better for men to have illicit relations than to leave the movement completely. Is this what Srila Prabhupada wanted?
Wait, I don't read this. I have to cut close to read this. I was told women.
Read it out loud.
Okay, I was told women in marriage should provide for the, parentheses, illicit sex needs of men. Whoa, I guess I've never heard that one.
Okay,
reasons given that it keeps them calmer to pursue Krishna consciousness. I don't know. Okay.
In other words, you have a situation where the husband is saying, I am sexually unfulfilled. I need you to fulfill that. If you don't, they're going to go to a prostitute or another woman. And so she's saying that she has heard that therefore that the women should do that to keep the man happy and calm. And is this what Srila Prabhupada wanted? The fact that you've never heard that doesn't sound like that Prabhupada said to do that, but
well,
I would also say whether he said to do it or not, that we can also discuss the pros and cons.
Yeah, in reality, how do we apply the principles? But well, if I think back many, many years ago, maybe I have heard that principle, but it's, again, I think the focus was always on regulation, and the idea is to cut down on, the number of times, even if somebody's so lusty. I mean, really, first of all, if somebody's so lusty that they're just, would even consider having to go outside the marriage to go to a prostitute or another woman or whatever, it's like, what is that person doing getting married? I mean, there's like, because control of the senses is like, it kind of goes hand in hand with chanting Hare Krishna. And, I mean, it sounds like a marriage is not
but what
healthy.
But you could say, the man is trying to be Krishna conscious, but he maybe he's not chanting 16 rounds, or even if he is, he doesn't chant. He's not. He's just like we're saying, people have their nature.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have that like renounced nature, and it's just, he's a young man. He's 25 years old, and it's like he's got to do something with that energy, and he's afraid it'll be misdirected. And
I suppose it is better than going to, if that's the choices. Okay, either
right.
The woman is gives the man what she wants, or he's out there doing who knows what. That's
in our class on sexual purity for men, we did discuss this.
Yeah, and
one of the things that one of the devotees said, he said sometimes a couple will go to counseling, and sometimes the counselor will tell the wife, well, you should do this for the husband. And he said that he felt that it's quite awkward if the wife is doing that, and doesn't want to do it, being instructed by a counselor.
A non-devotee counselor?
No,
so it's
a devotee.
Even a devotee counselor. Yeah,
Sometimes devotee. Well, Carol, this will answer part of your question. I never heard Prabhupada say that, but devotee counselors have said such things. And so they're taking license. I mean, you could understand that for a guru to compromise in any way it just kind of opens Pandora's box, because we all try to compromise even when the guru doesn't, and we try to, if there's a little, like a mouse, he just needs a little space and he can get in, just like, you ever seen mice, it's just like tiny little space, like a half an inch, and then they crawl under it. So that's my take on Prabhupada's instructions in the strictness, and he's representing the disciplic succession, and no acharya in history would say this per se from the seat of the acharya. Now, from the seat of a private counselor, when he's not in the seat of the acharya speaking in public, he could say such things. It's possible to a particular disciple in a particular situation after analyzing all sides of it. It's possible that he could say that. Prabhupada, never did say that. I don't think he would, and I don't think even the guru who would say that in private would necessarily say that in public.
What about the principle of premarital counseling? I think that's instituted now in ISKCON, that couple get clear on what their expectations are.
Right.
And I think if you can be open and honest at that point, then you might not have like if the wife finds out that the person she's planning on getting married, that this is what he expects. Like, I know I'm not going to be able to control myself. I know I'm going to want to have sex regularly. So, and if that's not what she wants, and then she knows it's going to disturb her. Yeah, then
that's a good
maybe
point. That's a very good point. And then the problem arises when he thinks he doesn't want it, in 10 years down the road he wants it.
Right.
When I was a devotee, I joined in Berkeley, and then later in San Francisco, and we came from that culture where everybody had taken drugs and had sex. And there was one boy who joined the temple, and later on he left, and he said, well, all of you, you all had girlfriends, you're all living with girls, you're all taking drugs, so you're all burned out and you're all renounced now. He said, I never did this, so I have to go out and do it and get burned out like you. So there is a, that's even in the Bhagavatam, there is the sense of satisfying the senses in a regulated way, just so you can overcome them. You're becoming, like we say, become attached to become detached. You're hungry, you eat, you satisfy yourself. And I think it's also what's different is, like for devotees like ourselves, we joined in ashrams, we lived as brahmachari, brahmacharini, we practiced them. That was, in our early youth, we were able to do that in the association of other devotees. So when we got married, it was kind of a lifestyle already, which we were carrying into the ashram. So even if we couldn't do it perfectly, it was very easy to get back on track, because that was the track we were already on. Whereas other people who are coming, nowadays people are coming to Krishna consciousness and they're not moving in ashrams, and they're living, they're going to work, and there's all these beautiful men or women at work, and they're dealing with intimately, and they're becoming, if they don't have a very close relationship with their spouse, it could be a problem. So, so you have to look at it individually. Okay, we have something else. Bhakti Carol says, and I was told I should be with a man, so it seems if I want to be celibate, I have to provide for sexual needs of a man. It depends on the man. Like Mahamaya is saying, you have to talk that over with a man. Not every man needs that, or is going to ask for that. Every man is different.
But it's really important to be open and honest, and not think you can do something that you really, like you're just hanging on the edge of your seat, but you're saying, oh yeah, I can be celibate. Yeah. Like, what's the good of that, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, so, in studying the whole world of celibacy, the conclusion that I've come to, or one of the conclusions, is that Prabhupada makes it fairly clear that to practice celibacy, so many things have to be in place, and if they're all not in place, or they're not well in place, it becomes difficult, especially if you're younger. Of course, as you get older, it's a little bit easier. It becomes more of a mental thing than a physical thing. But in particular when you're younger, Prabhupada said, unless you're very disciplined and self-controlled and you have regular kind of sadhana so that there's purity in all aspects of your life, then it'll be extremely difficult. So if a man and woman come together and they want to practice celibacy or most of the time practice it, then there's got to be activities which support it. If you're going to sit home at night and watch romantic movies on television, then it's like, what's going to happen? You're just going to get inspired. If you're going to associate with other grihastas who are able to follow this, if you're going to, see how you can do it, study how you can do it, work on it, have that intention, it's different. So I always instruct men that, you don't just have to throw in the towel, but you have to see that there are many things that you do in your life that can stimulate you sexually, and then you can avoid those things. And that's what our whole class on sexual purity was about. We were looking at all these things, and all the men got to look at all these things that they do that stimulate them sexually. And so what they did was we did an exercise called drawing the line. So you draw lines around your life which insulate you, because all the men said, I know where my borders are, and I know when I cross them, that's where I have trouble. Right. So we drew the lines in our life. So I would say to men, if your wife wants to be celibate, that you should take it upon yourself to do whatever you can, whatever humanly possible, to be able to honor that. Right? And then I would say to the woman, if your husband's doing that, but still once in a while he can't, he's just going crazy, then you can satisfy him, but let him know that this is not something that you want to continue in, and you also can help him.
And in your class, did you talk about other forms of physical intimacy that are not sex, like hugging and
we did talk
holding
about that.
Hands even?
Yeah, we did talk about that a little bit. It's an interesting topic for men, because men have a hard time, or many men have a hard time doing that without it stimulating them sexually. Yeah, so there is that kind of affection which comes from at least one aspect of it would be just respect. Respecting the desire and the needs of the wife for affection and not necessarily for sexual activity.
I like that advice, though, of knowing what your boundary is, and then the real trick is being able to recognize when you're at that point. If I go any further, this is what's going to happen. And
well, what we did, we did an exercise where they would draw all their boundaries in all areas, and then we asked them, draw your boundaries short of the actual falling point, so that even if you slightly cross your boundary, you still haven't hit the edge yet. So it's kind of like when you start to get close to your boundaries, if you're aware of them, then you start thinking, okay, this is my boundary, it's time to back off. Yeah. It can be quite effective. That's
good. That's a class just with men?
Yeah, it was a seminar of 12 hours. Oh, nice. So what I'm saying to the husbands or to the men is that they can control themselves a lot more than they think they can, but generally within the society we live in and what we're surrounded by, there's so much sexual stimulus that if we're not aware of it and aware of our limitations, then we become very disturbed. And we made the point, there are many things that men don't notice that are sexually stimulating, but once they become aware of them, they start to see them. So we made them in the seminar. We made them aware of visual images of women. For example, just simple things. If you go in a department store, if you go in a department store and you're just walking through the store and you happen to walk by the lingerie section, you're going to see huge posters of women, probably 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall, women in their underwear. So when I walk by that and I look at that and I think, there's 11, 12-year-old boys walking through this store. This is really bad. What to speak of grown men, and it's making an impression. It's just there. That's nice. And you get Victoria's Secret underwear catalog in the mail and Sports Illustrated and this and that, and it's just all around you.
What about just going to the beach on a summer day?
Oh yeah, going to the beach, yeah. So if you're not aware of it, what you're allowing yourself to look at. They have a saying in Sexaholics Anonymous, because they talk about these magazines, not even pornographic magazines, but just brochures and catalog, and they have a joke. I picked it up and looked at it to make sure it was the magazine I wasn't supposed to look at. Okay. So it's like the mind is so devilish and so tricky that oh, look at that magazine, because the man wants to look at it, but he knows now he's not supposed to, so now he's going to look at it to make sure he's not supposed to look at it. Hare Krishna. So we have Mario here. So Mario says, I chanted the Maha Mantra for 7 years in the 90s and wasn't celibate. However, I've recently come back to doing my rounds, and I'm doing it with less offenses, and therefore tasting spiritual bliss and ecstasy. I've found that my sexual drive has dissipated naturally because I'm now getting what I need spiritually. Yeah, that's awesome. This is ultimately. Let's give a big hand for Mario.
Yay, Mario.
So, I mean, ultimately, this is what our philosophy teaches. So,
it works.
if women, you're married to a man who's not sexually satisfied, and particularly you want to practice celibacy or more control, then, help him to improve his chanting and improve his spiritual life. So, now Carol says, but is it up to us to decide, or is it understanding what Srila Prabhupada wants? Both. You have to, if you try to understand what Prabhupada wants in relationship to where you're at. I mean, we know what Prabhupada wants, but is it that Prabhupada wanted celibacy for every person on the planet? Well, is that even possible?
No, he definitely didn't. First of all, there
wouldn't be any.
There wouldn't be any devotees to carry on.
You say procreation only sex only for procreation. Well, at least within those who are Brahminical, that would be there. Brahminical families who perform samskars like that. So that idea. But for the average person, at least keep it within marriage. Take responsibility, and teach your children, raise your children to be God conscious. So. Madhu has a question. Has there been any studies on how strictly grihastas are actually following? I remember hearing many years ago that very few grihasta leaders were able to limit to once a month, and even then it is for procreation. So Mario says it works, chanting good rounds works. Well, basically what Mario was saying, ecstasy works. That's actually the solution. I'll give you some statistics, at least from one counselor.
Okay.
These are the statistics that she gave. She said that the people who are able to practice celibacy perfectly well, there are two kinds. Really, really advanced devotees, very, very staunch, very, very strict. They're always the full temple programs. They're fully engaged in devotional service, and they're just extremely serious about Krishna consciousness. And also the couple that doesn't like one another. Because they can never get close enough for anything to happen. Because they're always like, don't talk to me, don't bother me, I don't want to see you, I hate you, like that. So if you really want to be celibate, we could suggest find somebody to marry that you think you'll hate, and then you'll have no problem.
She was asking for real statistics. There's no real statistics in ISKCON.
Okay, statistics. Right? I would say the statistics of somebody getting married and chanting 50 rounds before they have sex and only having sex then, the percentage is quite low. It becomes more the exception than the rule. But I would say that along the way, many, many grihastas come to that standard. But whether they were able to do it at the age of 25 perfectly, it becomes more the exception than the rule. But, you have to look at it in terms of, well, how many times did they fall, and what's the basic standard? And then you also have standards of people who are not entering grihasta life to follow that strictly. That's not their goal. So what, you have statistics?
No, there's no statistics.
These statistics are only from, what my friends tell me. So I know, you see, being a man, I know what it's like to be a man, and I know I was first married when I was 21. So, and I had become a devotee when I was 19, so it's 2 years after I'd become a devotee, so the prime of youth, of passion, and how difficult at that age, and it is to control sexual desire, and knowing so little about Krishna consciousness and having, all these past bad habits. So, but still, for the most part, we were able to do it. But I ran into a situation where I was actually too strict for my wife, and she didn't like it. Yeah. So, it's like to find this balance. It's like you say, premarital counseling is really, but in doing premarital counseling, you really have to look at be realistic about where you're at, and you don't always know that. You think I'm a stancho today, and then 10 years from now I realize, well, that was just my youthful fanaticism, and it's, now that I'm 30, I realize what I need, and it's all part of the difficulties of the Grihastha ashram and working it out. But we like Mario's program. It's the Chant Hare Krishna and Be in Ecstasy program. That tends to solve ecstasy tends to solve problems. Okay, it's 9:04. So, does anybody have any other last questions? I'm glad, Carol, you asked this question, and these are the kind of questions that people are afraid to ask.
Looks like she's put another question.
Should I read it?
Yeah.
So Bhakti and Carol is asking, I was raised by parents who demonstrated and taught with words not to have relationships except for producing children. Even though a Western family. I had boyfriends as a teenager, lived with nuns, and was taught celibacy. Chose celibate life as an adult. Married a husband from a Western culture who also instructed celibate marriage except for producing children. Then trying to come to this movement, read the regulative principles, but I'm told I need to be sheltered by a man and I should serve sex needs of that man. No, that's not true. I mean, I don't know you. Maybe they think that's what you need, but Prabhupada, you can find in Prabhupada's letters, he said if women don't want to be married, it's not necessary. And of course, we have the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, we have the shelter of so many gurus, Siksha gurus, association of other women.
Yeah, there's a devotee who was originally from France, what's her name? Prashanta, who is an advocate of the Brahmacharya ashram. Mm-hmm. So she herself, shaves her head. Of course, I shave my head. I'm a grihastha. But she wears white. And, she's never been married, and she never will be married. And she's not against marriage. She's just for herself.
Right. She's
just choosing.
Yeah.
And she's a preacher. She teaches courses, and she's just really happy. And, well, yeah. There's always problems being in a woman's body. And, nowadays there's some limitations sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially she's in India. So there's a lot of limitations, but still, she's,
But she's happy. That's the point.
Yeah. It's her,
Yeah. So Bhakti and Carol, it's up to you. Find quotes for you. Yeah, I mean,
get in touch with these other ladies.
The point is, this is my understanding, that Prabhupada said every woman should be married, but what he meant was that every woman in general. I was under the impression that Brahmacharya ashram was something that Prabhupada developed or created, but I found out that in Vedic history, at certain times and places, there were ashrams for women. And so you see that also in the Buddhist tradition now, it wasn't always for women, but there was women who wanted to live that way, so they allowed that. And of course, in the Catholic Church, you have the nuns, the sisters. So there's a place for this, and definitely you should understand how you should be best situated. That's Prabhupada's instructions. want to be situated according to what you think is the best for you. And then, maybe these people who are advising you feel that you need that. But we could say general instruction, yes, be married, but that's the general instruction. And Prabhupada never just sat in the temple and said, okay, you marry, you marry, you marry, and you marry this one and this one. Of course, he did that in the beginning for a few devotees. Kind of acting like the father, but after that, he never did that. He never forced any woman to marry.
In fact, he was at one point against marriages, and they were happening too fast. There were arrangements and immediately fire sacrifice, and then they didn't last.
Yeah.
So he made it more difficult
Yeah.
to have that fire sacrifice in. I mean, if a woman is like, if she's saying that she wants to be celibate, it would be a sacrilege to marry her to a man and just
of course. Well, she's saying she can't live in the temple. If she doesn't have the opportunity to live in a temple ashram, it doesn't matter. You can just live, make your home the ashram.
I mean, Prabhupada was advocating that we take up Krishna consciousness in our life. Just chant and be happy, right? It's not chant and lead a miserable life that's unnatural for you.
Yeah, right. So you just have to know what's natural for you, what works for you. She said, I'm older, I have been married, I already have children. So it's natural to move on.
Yeah.
That's the process. Move on to the next ashram. Yeah, it wasn't what I expected at this point in my life to be with a man. Well, if you don't want to be with a man and you're forced to be with one, it's not going to be fun. I just heard this story. This guy lived as a Buddhist monk for 30 years. But then he left and he got married. And in Buddhism, you're taught to just see everything equally. So his wife would say, you want to go to a movie or do you want to stay home? He goes, wherever you want. You want carrots or you want potatoes? Whatever you want. Do you want to go on vacation here or you want to go there? Whatever you want. And it was always like that. And she's like, why did you move out of the ashram and get married? If you're still living like a monk. So it's you have to live according to where you're at and what your consciousness is. And if you're too much in the renounced mode and you get married, unless your partner is that renounced, it doesn't work. It's just because usually people get married to not be renounced. So if you're marrying someone who wants the joys and comforts of household life and you're too renounced,
Actually, it's both ways, because I've heard of women getting married to men. When we would say, oh, he's still a brahmachari. So if you have premarital counseling and the man says, I don't want any children, and the woman says, I do, well, that is, a definite difference. And, so that should be worked out ahead of time, or, anyway, this works both ways, right?
Yeah, it can work both ways. Okay. So, thank you for asking that question. And this will be on Krishna.com for the next 10,000 years. Of course, hundreds of years from now, these things, people are going to look at this and say, why are they asking those questions? What's wrong with them?
Because they'll be so Krishna conscious.
They'll just understand all these things, and it'll be different.
Yes.
I think. Okay, thank you, Bhakti and Carol. Thank you, Mario and Manjesh and whoever else is there. Jai Jain. Oh, welcome, Jai Jain. And we'll see you all next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai.